to help demystify peer-to-peer campaigns and some basic suggestions to help you create your own roadmap to Give Out Day. Um, so let's start off with Give Out Day. For me, Give Out Day simply is a digital fundraising campaign. Horizons offers a platform, process, and portal for you to seek and collect donations driven by an urgency of a 24-hour time frame and motivated by the opportunity to win additional grants for your efforts. But the focus is on helping you grow your community. Our approach is that philanthropy is not a zero-sum game. It is a philanthropy of abundance and that our community gives with love and generosity. So there's going to be a lot of technical things, but the ultimate intention is community. Um, to unpack peer-to-peer fundraising a little bit, um, for me, peer-to-peer fundraising is in essence and driven by the framework of community-driven fundraising. Community-driven fundraising is, a simple concept that is not um, new in any way. You know what it is and how you've done it in the past. It's bake sales, it's food drives, it's car washes, gala tables. Um, these are all kind of the arrangements of community-driven fundraising. Um, the the idea of it is if I put you at a table with someone who loves me, I'm hoping that love spreads a little bit. In the modern era, it manifests itself as AIDS Walk or AIDS Life Cycle or any number of other walkathons or bowlathons, dances or skating, where we ask our networks to support our participation. Um, so now we're in this age of digital fundraising, and we're leveraging this thing called 2.0. Where am I? Sorry. Um, so we're leveraging this thing called a network society in Web 2.0, um, where we're looking to our community to help grow our community. So digital fundraising is kind of the manifestation of peer-to-peer, right? We're looking at essentially moving a set of people from our universe of community towards the smaller universe that we call our supporters, and eventually leading them through the peer-to-peer platform to become fundraisers and advocates for our work. So the classical models and frameworks of fundraising, which rely on sending appeals a few times a year, hosting annual galas and events, writing grants, is a very formal kind of case statement driven approach. Um, Over time, you're going to make a case for your organization, the problems you're trying to address, and the solutions you are offering to address the social problems. So we're going to seek to complement your traditional efforts with strategies that consider how digital fundraising is different. Um, with digital fundraising, we're trying to move people to action. Whatever your community looks like, remember that it encompasses every single individual. Sorry, I'm gonna pause for a second because I sound, I guess, muffled. I'll move closer to the speaker. Is that better? Is that better? Okay. Okay, I'll continue. Um, so whatever your community looks like, remember that it encompasses every single individual. From the people who donate money and time to the people you serve or whose lives are made better by your work. Being in community with us can be a very passive engagement. So the first part of the flowchart represents, kind of the traditional fundraising model of passive engagement. What we want to build is an activation to being in deeper engagement. Um, People who maybe donate more than once, people who volunteer, people who serve on your boards, people who show up and are present in your various events and activities. Um, There's a saying in fundraising that someone who has given you a gift once is just someone who gave you a gift once, literally. It takes effort to turn someone into a donor. In jargon, we can say that it's people who have an affinity for us. This effort can be driven by things like informing providing information so that they can understand and see you and what you do. In community-driven peer-to-peer campaigns, we aim to move our supporters towards becoming our advocates. We can call them influencers, you can call them ambassadors, but it's really asking people to tell a different story, a personal story. This is how you can control some of the narratives in marketing. It's referred to as the power of word of mouth. In peer-to-peer, we're helping them help us by providing an opportunity to fundraise with us. So when we look at the universe of our community in kind of this age of a network society, network social, we have to understand a little bit community behavior. Um, how does this all work? First, we have to understand that this network society we now live in has changed behavior because our world has changed. Technology has changed the way the world works and interacts. Information is more accessible. Constituents can self-explore your website, information about your organization via third-party services like GuideStar, which is now Candid, Cherry Navigator, etc. Um, and learn what these aggregate parties say about us. So the takeaway from that is information can come from any number of sources, and your ability to control the narrative is impacted. Your effectiveness in traditional building a case for support model is a low lesson. Connections are expansive and loose, um, meaning people may follow you on social media, they may like your posts, they may read your blogs, but their connection to you can feel a little bit less personal. Constituents are more likely to interact with what you present versus you. So you have to use these mechanisms to bring humanity back in. Building trust is being transparent in not only what you do, but how you do it and who you're doing it for. You never know what someone's first impression of you is, so these impressions matter. So here is my hypothesis, I guess is the best way to say it. I kind of firmly believe that digital fundraising is equal to digital marketing, which is equal to digital engagement, which is about individual engagement, which leads to word of mouth, and then the result is community. Um, so I think the way to help demystify digital fundraising and peer-to-peer campaigns in general is to understand that the essence of it is the same as all other forms of fundraising, which is um, when you are a community-centric fundraising model, you understand that constituents are part of your movement, whether they contribute time or money or resources. So if we know that individual engagement can lead to community, we have to think about kind of the individual choices that people are making. Um, we're getting a little bit into kind of behavioral economics here, which is sometimes difficult for fundraisers to make a leap to. The traditional kind of model of changing hearts and minds towards a lens about economic behavior and choices seems a little bit radical. Um, it makes it seem transactional. But my caveat about that is that these choices don't result in widgets. So it's a one-sided transaction at best. Um, for me, it's about the rationality of decision making. People are choosing to give to your organization for a variety of factors, psychological, emotional, with or without any reason. Some people might need that heart conversation, and some people might need information. Some people just need to be asked. Um, but all of these things we think about as how can we influence behavior? Um, so when individuals make choices, whether it's their purchasing of widgets or to donate to your organization, there's a number of variables that people kind of we can um, uh, look at to say that it influences behavior. The primary one that most marketing people kind of hone in on is the idea of social information or social proof to make decisions. In situations where there is not enough information, we can look to see what others are doing. People often look to peers for clues, so who they see contributing to or advocating for you might be very meaningful. In other words, they're looking at your community and some might be assessing if they belong in it. Um, this makes testimonials really powerful. Testimonials are persuasive forms of social proof because they embody an element of storytelling that builds trust and credibility. A fundraising page on your Give Out Day fundraiser is, in essence, a testimonial from an individual. So we return back to kind of our flow chart about, moving in a peer-to-peer campaign, moving constituents through this process that helps identify your community, isolates the supporters, and then activates the advocates. Um, so when we look at this, from a strategic perspective, you have to ask yourself, what does your community circles look like? Who are the people? What are the segments? What are the actions that can help you identify exactly who lives in your current universe? The second part that you want to ask yourself is, how can you move them towards engagement? And how are you going to create affinity? The last step in this kind of moves management system is, how do you activate them as advocates for you? Um, Peer-to-peer campaigns, Give Out Day especially, offers a solution that says, if you can get people to create a fundraising page on your Give Out Day main page, then they can become advocates and fundraisers for you. So when you look at the first part where you're trying to figure out, how do you identify individuals in your community who might become your fundraisers, the main strategies that I'd like to advocate is that you don't approach this as just a social media experiment. Um, Community-driven fundraising is about your social network. So using your social network and not just your social media is highly advantageous to expanding and building on your community. Um, the second strategy is, of course, just make a list, which seems really, I don't know, simple. It just seems like something that is common sense. But what I'm really saying here is that I want you to map your network. Make a list of people you know with their contact information, how you know them, and what you want to ask them for. Um, of these lists, I would say that, you can make first targets, you can make second targets, you can make looser targets. Um, Ask your board members to be your first fundraising volunteers. Start with your closest supporters. Your board is already positioned to be advocates for your organization, so let them. Help them get ready, and then ask them to ask their networks to participate. This can lead to new fundraisers or just donations for specific fundraiser pages on Give Out Day. The second question about affinity is seeking to inform them of your goals. So you assess your community. You've done a series of emails asking people to, hey, check out our Give Out Day page. Become a fundraiser. It's really easy. Here's a template that you can look at. Here's our main page. But then you want to increase their enthusiasm for participating, for being part of your group. So if you have campaign goals, it's nice to explicitly state them. Whether your goal is a set target, the traditional fundraising thermometer, or you're seeking to win a challenge grant offered by Horizon. Obviously make it as easy as possible for people to make their fundraising pages. I heavily encourage templates. The Mighty Cause platform in our kind of nonprofit toolkit has a number of documents and help tools that will, help you create your templates, strategies for devising what you should include or not include. I'm not going to go into details because that material already exists, but it's certainly something you should access and kind of adapt to how you work and how you want to do things. The last part about affinity for me is treating the people involved as if they're partners in your endeavor. Um, Providing them language to speak about your organization can help increase both their confidence in being able to be your advocates and also supplying them with the kind of information that you would like them to pass on to their networks. This is a way of taking back, kind of the loose narrative we as nonprofit organizations have lost a little control over. So if you are able to create narratives that are easily iterative and can be repeated and easy for your partners to share, that makes it a little bit easier for the receiving audience to understand who you are and what you do, in connection with a person that is seeking to be your advocate. So then, when you get a group of people to create fundraising pages for you, the work becomes helping them help you. Um, the Mighty Cost platform does create a number of repositories for you to be able to upload content, whether it be pictures or videos, stories, your own testimonials, information about your programs. And that should be content that your fundraiser can access and use and parse into something that is very personal. Um, you want to keep them informed, you want to communicate a lot so that they trust in you in your process, but also you allow them to be trusted by their network. Um, let them know that they belong in a group of people like them. And this is just another way that we as organizations can create community for our constituents. Um, because fundraising can be a little bit intimidating. And we want to remind people that they're not alone, that there is a whole movement behind them, that there are people who are attempting to do the same things they are, that you are there to stand in support. Um, so you are a resource, but so is every other fundraiser in your campaign. So the more you can create group dynamics where people are sharing information with each other, they might share their own personal pictures that they have of your work in your organization. Um, it can be much more meaningful in leading towards very personal stories. Um, the third component of advocacy is always making it fun. I recognize that I'm maybe a little bit weird because I think fundraising is fun. Um, but not a lot of people feel that way. So I would, figure out ways to engage with your group of constituents as advocates. We're not worried so much about Give Out Day itself in this moment, where we know that when that 24-hour period comes, we will be all hands on deck, you know, doing a lot of social media postings, reaching out in emails, sliding into DMs to try and get people to contribute on Give Out Day and to donate and to participate. But the management of the group leading up to it should be a, celebratory kind of event. Because people have to build up some anticipation of being able to contribute. So this is just kind of like an example of a possible timeline. If I were in your shoes and know, say I'm starting today with trying to create a group of fundraisers, build campaign pages, link it all back to my main campaign page. It all seems very daunting, but we can start with just a simple timeline of 3 activities, right? Um, so I would say that in March, it's taking the map of your network and doing traditional reach out. I would heavily advise that you do personal emails, that you do not do mass marketing emails, um, because I think the ask is very simple, right? It's kind of explaining where you are in your campaign, what you are attempting to do, and then asking someone to join. Asking someone to join by a very simple act of creating a fundraiser page. Um, so the more personal you can make it, the more likely someone will say yes to creating a campaign page for you and to becoming a fundraiser for you. The goal here is to create as many fundraising pages from individuals as possible. We can't predict how active any fundraiser will be. We can't predict how committed they'll be when Give Out Day comes, but we can, kind of play a little bit of the numbers game and get as many people to say yes as possible to at least sign up for the Mighty Cause fundraiser page. Start with a skeleton structure, and then your organization, your team that's working on it, the volunteers that are helping you, can then work with people to ensure that their fundraising pages is a version of who they are as they present your organization to their social networks. Um, as we lead towards Give Out Day, the asks become a little bit more specific and targeted. Are we asking people to reach out to 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, hundreds of people to say, help me today by contributing on my fundraising page? This is where your board is probably going to be very helpful. We hope that our board leads by example, and kind of the easiest project to undertake is getting every single one of your board members, advisory board members, whoever it is that are the main stakeholders of your organization, to start by creating a fundraising page. We're not asking for money in this moment, so the ask is very simple. So we have to figure out a way to overcome any inhibition and fears we might have, uh, by knowing that what we're doing is building community, and community is about engagement. And this is just one way of engaging with us. It is our only ask right now, and it is simple and it's easy to fulfill, and it makes people feel good, and you celebrate them, and then you move on. So the main goal, I think, in general, is that you are in constant communication. And I recognize that capacity is very limited at our organizations. And it's one of those things where it's easier to say to be in constant communication. Um, but I think we get a little bit lost sometimes because we think we have to reach out to everyone right now. Um, and I think this is where your mapping might be really helpful in terms of prioritizing who you should reach out to directly. Because if you can't reach out to everyone, at least start with one person. Um, as your groups get bigger, you can, certainly find ways to automate that, have your messaging and your templates, be um, ready to go and canned and things like that. You can start writing those things now while you're developing um, your network maps. Um, but the goal is to never lose track of the people involved, the people who say yes to this very simple thing about starting a fundraising page. So there are a number of tools on Mighty Cause that you can use. I think you can export a list of all your fundraisers. You can input any number of prospects. Use what you have to create templates. To design your content that you want to share with them based on what you know of them. Um, I think it's very easy to get lost in generalities and to think that you need a, kind of one-stop solution for everyone. And sometimes the simplest ask is just knowing the person you're speaking to and knowing what it is they need to receive in terms of their decision making, whether they are choosing to participate because they know of you really well, or um, if they're choosing to participate because a friend asked them. And I think, being sensitive to the individuals who are involved in your campaign is the number one key to success in ensuring that on Give Out Day itself, you can make a run for those leaderboards, or you can meet your, thermometer target goals. I do want to mention that there are going to be 2 upcoming communication webinars. If you need additional help and additional information about, kind of driving content and creating content, I would certainly encourage you to check that out and look at that. I think there's a 101 and then there's a 201. But I will say that, I think you can start now. I don't think you have to wait to receive, more and more information in order to craft a very simple thank you email. I think there's a question that I want to address. Let's see. Given the feeding frenzy of competition that takes place on the actual day, have you seen best practices that lead to the effort being worthwhile for an organization? For example, is a budget of where exactly the funds will go and for what purposes better than just a general ask? We spent 3 months working on our campaign several years ago, following all the rules and advice, and when all was said and done, it almost wasn't worth the effort. To be perfectly honest, any advice on how to avoid repeating that this year? Um, so I think there's a number of questions I would ask about your efforts. Um, I think I don't know what you mean when you say a general ask. I think some organizations perform well with a general ask. Certain types of organizations are more comfortable with a project narrative or a purpose narrative. But I think if you're not receiving the return that you had hoped for, it might be maybe a question of numbers. Did you just have kind of one fundraising page that was your main page, um, and not a lot of volunteer fundraisers also kind of contributing and advocating for you? I think advocates can advocate for something very general in addition to something very purposeful, and it's not uncommon for both to perform well. I don't think there's any data within the sector that says, you know, we should limit what we ask for to very tangible things, um, because the behavior of donors doesn't lead typically to tangible things. And it might help your constituents to understand, kind of the one-to-one payoff for your donations, but it's certainly not something that is necessary for all donors. Um, so, I'm not a big best practices person. My kind of framework is to say that this thing that we do is a little bit loose. Every organization will have to do it a little bit differently because we're working with different communities and different constituents. And there isn't a general, one solution for everyone that um, negates the fact that our communities are very individualistic. What we do at a youth organization might look very different than um, a transitional homelessness organization, or a senior care facility. Um, so I think if you map your network and kind of assess what your audience is, it might help, both in how you're asking for fundraisers and then managing and project managing your fundraisers towards being successful on Give Out Day itself. Um, Hopefully that answers your question. Um, So that's really the end of my formal presentation, because I think what our aim here is to say that we are all still learning, right? There's a story in physics, um, about Einstein and how he had to write the special theory of relativity before he wrote the general theory of relativity, um, because it was much easier to conceive of a very kind of specific rule before you can become general and generalize things about the industry or about the nature of the universe in general. And I think that way about philanthropy and fundraising, where I think we're in a era where we have to do very specific things. We have to learn very specific things about our organizations and the small part of the universe that we have to navigate through. Um, before we can take someone else's solution and necessarily just apply it to us and have it work in the same way, because it never does. So I think we're pretty early. That is really kind of the general idea and framework that I'm proposing. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Hi, this is Nicole again. Thank you, Terry. That was wonderful. I'm sure folks learned a whole lot from you. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into either the Q&A box or into the chat like you've been doing. Otherwise, if you think of anything that you want to ask us after the webinar is over, please send an email to giveoutday@horizonsfoundation.org. Again, that's giveoutday@horizonsfoundation.org. And we will respond that way if you think of anything later. I'm not seeing anything else come up in the chat box. I do want to, as Terry did, point out that we do have a couple more communications and marketing webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks. All of our webinars are on Wednesdays at noon noon Pacific Coast time, 3 p.m. on the East Coast. and we look forward to helping you. Let's see, I think we've got another question. Okay. Okay, Terry, are you seeing this question?
Oh yeah. So specifically around raising funds to do a 4K remaster and theater release of a classic LGBT documentary. So it would be very project and deliverable based. Any advice specific to that sort of fundraising project? Um, so let me think about this approach. Can you identify who your current constituent network might be? Are you looking at people who would access the documentary once you finish the remaster and um, identify the theater for release? Um, so like for me, it seems like I don't necessarily think that this effort benefits from being too specific about the project and deliverable. Um, I think there's a story here that you can tell uh, about the impact of this A documentary and possibly the impact of being able to um, remaster it and have it released again in theaters. Sometimes we can maybe be a little bit too specific where you're going to lose your audience in terms of, on give out day, people might encounter this campaign page and they're just trying to understand a little bit and make a decision about, you know, um, if they can support, how much they can support, and what it is they're supporting. Um, being so focused on the particular activity of the work uh, is a little bit moving away from kind of how human beings conceive of their philanthropic effort, which is to say, it's about an expansion of impact or a consideration of impact. Um, so I would certainly, the people involved with the production of the remaster, hopefully it's more than you. If it is just you, then, reaching out to other kind of film geeks and theater nerds, maybe to be your advocates and fundraisers. Um, there is a specific language to your effort here that I think needs to be translated to make it a little bit more digestible. Um, so that would be my approach.
If I could add, I think what Terry has just said is completely correct, and that's what you can do with your fundraiser pages and with your own Give Out Day profile fundraiser page on the site. But one way that you could get into the more granular, like what you're talking about, would be to, when you set up the donation levels, you're able to say like $50 does this, $100 does this. And that can sometimes be an effective way to use that particular mechanism within the site while still using the page itself to tell a story and be more engaging.
I would agree with Nicole, like using that little widget on the side that identifies, I guess we call it the itemized list of, deliverables or whatever it is, can help clue people in on an appropriate amount or assess whether, they can push the boundaries of their capacity. But I certainly would agree that the body of your campaign page is more about the story of why you're doing this and why this film is important and why this project is important. Um, and it's not just like filmmaking that uses this kind of itemized tactic. A lot of health clinics will do that where it's like $50 will, provide vaccinations to X amount of people or malaria nets. It is an economic tool to try and help kind of this act of donation land itself in economic decision making in terms of being able to apply a value um, to essentially what is altruism, right? So I don't necessarily have any information that that is more or less effective. That it is a common practice um, is certainly true. I think those, if you're looking for, it is certainly more successful for gathering small gifts. Small grassroots level gifts tend to benefit from that. It's a little bit difficult to kind of change the conversation in that towards kind of like higher level impact giving, more higher level major giving. Um, so hopefully, you can do both. You don't have to just go all in on one perspective and framework. If you can tell a good story in your main campaign page, it will lead to facilitating those clickable gifts in that sidebar that provides a valuation, a tangible, kind of parallel to what things represent in the real world or how much things cost you to do anything. Right?
All right, those were great questions. Do we have any more while we still have each other on the line? If not, I'm happy to go ahead and end this a little bit early. I know we could all use a few more minutes in our day. Otherwise, please go ahead and type your questions in now, or you can, as I said before, send them to us via email at giveoutday@horizonsfoundation.org, and we'll be happy to reply there as well. And we hope that you will join us next week for the first of the Marketing and Communications webinars. All right, I'm not seeing anything else pop up. Terry, do you have any last words?
No, I think I'm just hopeful about your efforts and your journey. I think Give Out Day is really fun, and I hope you take a moment to enjoy it. It is fundraising that is a little bit different, but fundraising is a conscious process of building a community of people who are invested in your success, um, you know, financially and otherwise. And I would hope that you consider your supporters members of your movement, that you treat them as activists and you let them be activists for you on Give Out Day. If there's one takeaway from all this, it's allowing people to show up for you and giving them space and creating room to do that. Um, and I hope you're successful. And if have the opportunity to provide feedback to us, we would certainly appreciate it. We certainly want to know of your successes. We would also want to know of the attempts that you made that might inform your peers here in this room and viewing this webinar on Give Out Day itself.
Okay, so I do see another question has come in, and this is actually about what qualifies an organization or a project to participate in Give Out Day. We do have some language on the site in the registration and rules around what would qualify. So for us, it's either going to be an LGBTQ primary organization or program or project, and by primary that would be definitionally that the sort of like the staff and board or the principal filmmakers are LGBTQ, that the project or program is explicitly LGBTQ as well, and that the and that the intended audience or intended service population is primarily within the LGBTQ community. So in this particular instance, you're saying that you're an LGBTQ filmmaker with a project that isn't about the LGBTQ community. So I would say that in this particular instance, that would not be a project that would qualify for Give Out Day. If it were an LGBTQ film, then yes, it would definitely qualify. If you have any other questions about that, please feel free to drop me an email. I can maybe point you to some other giving days or some other resources that you can access that will help you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in now. thank you very much for attending this webinar. I hope you learned a lot. Terry, thank you very much. You provided a whole bunch of information that I think is really useful for folks. And I was really excited to be able to do this webinar with you. And thank you, everybody. We look forward to supporting your Give Out Day campaign this year. And if you have any questions about this webinar or anything else, please go ahead and send an email to giveoutday@horizonsfoundation.org. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.